how to think, and how to analyze. They wouldn't be able to do that if it wasn't for the teachers that taught them how to read and write and speak. And they wouldn't be able to do that if it wasn't for the preschool and kindergarten teachers who taught them what shapes are and how to write their name. And so right now, I'd just like us to give a big round of applause for all the teachers that you've had that have prepared you for this moment. And the last group that I would like to thank is the seniors themselves. In the hardest times of my life, I've found the things that we use to measure success generally are worthless or subpar. And this year has been one of those years. Yes, you'll receive a grade. Yes, you'll receive a report card. But I don't think any of those measures will tell you if you've succeeded this year. The reality is, in those tough times in life, sometimes the best success is just showing up. Despite the fact that you're out of energy, out of ideas, out of any kind of strength, and just showing up is enough to be successful. And we've all heard throughout our country and maybe possibly throughout the world how many students have failed to show up this year because of the circumstances that have been placed upon them. And most of the adults are saying things like, if I was their age, I probably wouldn't have shown up either. But here at Logos, I'm proud to say that we have 10 seniors at the beginning of the year, and we still have 10 seniors giving speeches. And so we'd like to give you guys a round of applause for the perseverance and the grit you've shown today. You honor yourselves in your perseverance. You honor us, your teachers. You honor your school community. And above all, you honor God and by displaying that character. Well done. The senior thesis course, the goal of the course is not to have the students write a paper. The ultimate goal is not to have them give a speech. The ultimate goal is not for them to impress you either. The ultimate goal of senior thesis could simply be stated, it's to give the student a chance to cultivate wisdom. That is one of the most ludicrous goals I have ever heard. 17-year-olds learning wisdom? Is that possible? We don't normally say, oh, if you want to hear wisdom, go to a teenager. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. And yet that's the goal for senior thesis. Wisdom is different than knowledge. We can cram knowledge into students' head and we can force them to memorize it with endless quizzes and tests. But wisdom is something quite beyond and above knowledge. Wisdom is gained through knowledge, yes, but experience, character, failure, success, and then learning how to discern what is truth and what is the right way forward. That is the goal of senior thesis. And as ludicrous as it is, it will remain the goal of senior thesis because if it's anything less, then that's what it is. It's just less. It's not seeking the things that will truly take us where we want to go. And so wisdom is what we seek. And I think this year, after hearing some of the speeches already, I think we have heard wisdom. The Bible describes wisdom as a woman standing on a crowded street, yelling out, listening, begging people to hear. And for those who hear, she will pour out her spirit on them. And over the past few days, I feel like we've heard glimpses of that wisdom. It might have been a line or a phrase that one of the seniors used, or it might have been an argument that we haven't heard, or a piece of information that turned a light on, or a perspective that brought something new to us. But in those moments, we gained wisdom, and we could say, that teen just taught me something. And that's why it's worth having such a ludicrous goal of asking a 17-year-old to come up and teach a school about something. So today, students, those who are here and those who are watching, and adults, of course, as well, today be ready and be listening for wisdom. The Bible says, the man who stores up wisdom will be a shield to those around him. Wisdom is calling out, so be ready to listen to it with expectant hearts and ears that are anticipating receiving something new today. Before I ask the first senior to come up and give their presentation, let's take a moment to pray for all four of them. Lord Jesus, you are the master teacher, a teacher full of knowledge, and grace, and love, and wisdom. We ask that your Spirit would fill this room today, that it would be so full that there would be nothing else but you in this room. Fill this room so that we might be ready to receive the word and the truth and the inspiration that you have for us today. Also fill this room to comfort the seniors that are going. We pray that you would comfort Zipporah and Arlette and Janelle and Jeremy, and that you would let them know deep in their hearts that what they have, what they've worked on so tirelessly has not been in vain. And so we anticipate the truth that we share today. We ask this all in Jesus' wonderful and holy name. Amen. It's my pleasure and joy to welcome, please join me in welcoming Jeremy Flowers to the stage today.
When I was a newborn, I was born with many health issues. I was premature, meaning I was born earlier than my due date. I also had a hernia in my appendix, which is like a stress ulcer. I had ADHD, I had weak lungs, and I stayed in the hospital for 3 months after birth. 2 weeks later, after I was born, I received a major surgery to remove my appendix, leaving about 5-inch scar on my stomach. When I was growing up as a toddler, I started talking. My mother noticed I had slurred speech and I stuttered. From then, I was taken to a doctor, and I was diagnosed with a speech impediment. During school, when I gave presentations such as this, I stuttered a lot, and I was often talked about and bullied, and often felt broken and alone. Of course, everyone with a disability has their own unique experiences. When I conducted an interview with someone who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, she explained about how her disability affects and has affected her mind, as well as explaining all the very different variations of symptoms there are. It is an indisputable fact that people with disability struggle with life's problems harder than most, whether they be a physical disability or a mental disorder. Again, it is indisputable that those with disabilities have to struggle through constant problems, whether that does or does not involve their disability. In 1975, Congress passed a legislation called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which is now called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA for short. The IDEA Act gives children ages 3 to 21 free access to public education in the least restrictive manner. This act transformed many lives and led people with special needs on a path to success. This act provides a wide range of services because different disabilities affect people in many different ways. They cause all kinds of symptoms, from mental disorders to physical deformities. To counteract the effects of a disability, some might go through physical therapy or for a period of time to better understand how to lessen the effects of their disability. You might also take medication, which would cause other symptoms on top of the different symptoms. It is a widely known opinion that people with disabilities are said to need fixing and require lots of help. While the Education for All Handicapped Children Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act made in 1990 were positive steps for persons with disabilities, there is more that can be done to combat the persistence of ableism in the United States. An emphasis on becoming more educated about ableism and increased awareness of organizations that support persons with disabilities, and an acknowledgement that some persons with special needs are subject to prejudice due to their specific disability will help further the progress of persons with disabilities. By a show of hands, how many of you have heard the word ableism? Okay? By a show of hands, how many of you know what the word means? Ableism is defined as the prejudice against those with disabilities. As there are not many people who know what ableism is, you could say that there is no reason to talk about it. People with disabilities are victims to many negative stereotypes. Here are some examples. People with disabilities deserve pity. People with disabilities are wheelchair bound. There are many different disabilities that affect the body or brain for that matter. Here are some positive ones. People with disabilities are brave. People with special needs are courageous or heroic and inspirational. There have been numerous victories for disability awareness. One example was in April 2006 in West Virginia. This struck a bell that started a celebration has named October to be the Disability Awareness Month. There are many different organizations that support people with special needs, such as the Bell Socialization Program, the Best Buddies Program, and the Buddy Bench Program. The Bell Socialization Program is a program that teaches life skills to people with special needs from ages 15 through 36, around from 30 to 40. It teaches budgeting, job skills, and interviewing techniques. They also provide shelters for the homeless and homes for individuals who cannot live by themselves. They also recruit volunteers to meet needs. They also have programs that work with local employers to help place people into jobs that are appropriate for their skill level. The Best Buddies program is an international program that allows students our age to go out to different camps and organizations to just hang out and have fun with people with special needs. And it allows interaction to lessen the effect of ableism. And the Buddy Bench program was made actually here in York, PA, by an 8-year-old. It was just a small camp that allowed different age groups to just hang out and have fun all over York. One other organization is the Arc of York County program. It is a summer camp opportunity for people with special needs. And their mission statement is, quote, to provide age-appropriate programs for children and teens, emphasizing personal, socialization, and recreational skills that can be carried over into daily lives, to provide maximum physical and mental stimulation during the summer months, thereby minimizing regression in skills, to provide family members with a valuable respite service, as well as a developmental experience for individuals with disabilities, to provide campers with disabilities contact with non-disabled volunteer peers, as well as providing staff and volunteers with in-service training, and to offer a variety of camp components each session, including indoor and outdoor self-care instructions, arts, crafts, and music. Disability affects many others in many different ways. In order to be able to speak extensively on this topic, we need to learn about so many different things. Ableism has terrible effects on people with disabilities. Insecurities are something that we all struggle with, but it is often heightened by individuals with disabilities because they also often feel like they do not belong. The trauma caused by a disability is breathtaking. It often causes low self-esteem, like self-isolation, and sometimes even depression. What doesn't help is that sometimes people are often careless with words and may not realize how harsh words can devastate someone with disabilities who is already so starved for community and relationships. This language is called people's first language. You should never define someone by their disability. If someone does not have a disability, they might be too wrapped up in their own lives to even give the topic any thought. Many of these people might not see what the big deal is or why we need to educate people on the topic. Luke 14:12-14 says, "Then Jesus says to his hosts, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, brothers or sisters, or your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." What this verse says is that instead of inviting those that can offer you something in return, instead invite people who have nothing to offer you back, so that you can be repaid and so that you can learn to give gifts instead of receiving gifts. The battle against ableism should begin in the home and in schools. Special education teaches people with disabilities, but unfortunately, most schools do not ever teach students why special education exists and how to interact with students with disabilities. This should be a core part of every school's curriculum. This is also why schools should decide whether or not to mainstream putting students with disabilities in classrooms with other students on a case-by-case basis. Others believe that adding this curriculum to schools would be too expensive and time-consuming. It would take away from other core topics. For example, parents of students in special education may have low academic expectations. Ableism is prejudice and discrimination against people with disabilities. It is a very widespread problem in the United States and all around the world. Ableism has devastating mental, emotional, and even physical effects on people with disabilities. Every person in each disability unique, and it affects everyone differently. Anti-ableism instruction should be included in curriculums for school. Although many people across the world struggle with disabilities and often face bullying, there are many ways to combat ableism. I challenge you to think carefully about whether or not you have people with special needs as a friend of yours. If so, that is the first step to combating this problem. Then consider how you talk to them. Don't define them by your disability. Despite their disability, they have incredible worth. I hope you can see past their disability to discover their unique gifts and interests of worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. In terms of, you mentioned the idea of the importance of including students with disabilities in mainstream classrooms. How would you respond to a parent or a teacher who says that including students with disabilities in their classroom would cause the rest of the class to suffer, to learn less?
So you're asking like, sorry, can you repeat?
Sure. How would you respond to a parent or a teacher who's got concerns saying that if students with disabilities are included in the classroom, then the students who don't have disabilities might not be able to progress as far academically as they would have?
So I don't believe I came across that in my research.
Jeremy, we live in a society of intolerance. When differences are called out, set apart, as opposed to called in, as Jesus called us to do. Often this calling out results in violence. Recently, we saw the death at the hands of police, of Elijah Javon McClain, who was diagnosed with autism. In your research, have you seen a higher incidence of violence by law enforcement and society in general against those labeled as differently able?
That actually didn't come across in my topic. I was more going for like how to combat it rather than like the overall violence towards people with disabilities.
Thank you.
Jeremy, you did an excellent job. Thank you. With advances in technology, we can now often find out if a child has a disability before they are even born. So do you see any dangers in making a value judgment about someone's life before they are born? And are prenatal screenings, would you say they're an advancement in women's health or an effect of ableism?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so with advances in technology, we can often find out if a child has a disability while they're still in their mother's stomach. And so my question was just, do you think prenatal screenings are an advancement in women's health? Are there positives, would you see, to prenatal screenings, or would you say they're an effect of ableism?
I'd see prenatal screenings as a positive way to combat it, because if we're able to see what special need that child might have, then we can at an earlier date we can figure out ways to help reduce the effects of that disability.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. You mentioned in your presentation people first language. And I was just wondering if you could give an example of what people first language sounds like for those that might not know what it means to use people first language.
So people's first language is like well, it's very self-explanatory. Like it's talking about the person first before like their disability. Like say I were to say someone with a wheelchair, like, oh, he has a wheelchair, that would be people's first language. It's basically defining someone as soon as you see them.
How would you respond? So the result of a lot of these acts has resulted, thankfully, in a lot of funding for public schools so that they can provide equitably for students with disabilities. But what about schools like Logos? How would you respond, first of all, to a school that might say that they lack the resources to educate everyone equitably, and so therefore they just can't or won't do it?
So I can't speak extensively on that, but in my personal opinion, I feel that some schools have curriculum that might not be needed, and instead of having those classes, I would add a class that would help explain the effects of disability, the effects of ableism, and just overall how mental disorders, physical disorders affect people.
I'll defer to you, Ms. Murray.
Jeremy, I was wondering in your research if you came across any unique things employers are doing to try to be able to hire people, or unique ways that they're doing job training for people with disabilities.
So you're saying like how jobs are accommodating for people with disabilities? So most like office jobs, like for the more physical disabilities, most job offices have ramps to their buildings and elevators. For some jobs, they have like in the building, like not an area, like it's like a special department that helps that person with whatever work they're doing. Most office jobs have that sort of department in them.
One more question, Jeremy. As you think about your time here at Logos or at other schools that you've been at, so as you think about your whole K-12 schooling experience, what are the ways in which schools can be better at promoting ableism awareness?
Like I mentioned in my speech, October is Disability Awareness Month, and there's a specific week in October that's just specifically for like disability awareness. And some schools are actually teach like about disability that week. And from the schools I've been in, none of the schools I've been in have actually talked about any disabilities. They haven't had any special needs education classes. But preferably, I would love to have one. Even in college, I'd love to have one, just so I'd know how to talk to that person without using offensive language. And yeah, I just love to be able to learn more about disability.
So you would recommend Logos maybe being a little more proactive?
Oh, highly.
Okay,
Yes.
great, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think a lot of us think that so much work has been done for people with disabilities that we can easily fall into the trap of thinking the work is over. Thank you for the reminder that there's still much left to be done. Please join me in welcoming to the stage. Oh, I'm sorry. I did forget one announcement. We will take an intermission after our next speech, where you'll be able to use the restrooms and those things. So please welcome our next speaker to the stage, Zipporah Goins.
Elementary crushes. a universal experience. You get excited to show them your new jump roping technique. And then you go home and write about them in your pink, fluffy diaries. At least, this was my experience. Like many preteens, the diary I kept contained drawings and descriptions of my elementary crushes. And at first, this seems harmless, maybe even adorable. Until you realize that all of my crushes were produced out of subconscious, internalized racism. Let me elaborate. All of my crushes followed the same pattern. They were white, blue-eyed males. Even then, I had began telling my peers that I was both black and white. And when my father sat me down and corrected me and confirmed our black heritage, I literally cried. You see, my reluctance to date outside of my ideal type was a form of sexual racism. A 3-part racial project titled Just a Preference defines sexual racism as a specific form of racial prejudice enacted in the context of sex and/or romance. Baseline moral agreements suggest that racism against any ethnic group is immoral. And through this lens of racial sensitivity, it should be of concern to the public, to all of us. Most people just assume that their dating preferences are neutral and non-racist, or simply reflect benign partiality. But the truth is, racial bias is ingrained in these dating preferences, and it is up to us to evaluate them and unlearn them. Firstly, I will discuss dating apps and how they illuminate these biases. Secondly, I will discuss the impact of beauty standards on these preferences. And thirdly, we will discuss the counterpart of sexual racism, a racial fetish. Despite what you may think, dating services have a long history in our country. In 1965, Harvard students led Operation Match. Operation Match was a dating service accompanied with a questionnaire. This questionnaire asked about your physical preferences, of course, and one question being specifically about race. And these are, of course, quite outdated terms, but the choices were Oriental, Negro, or Caucasian. Despite this question existing on the form, interracial marriage bans still existed in 16 states. It wasn't until Loving versus Virginia, a case some of you may have heard about, the legalization of interracial marriage followed shortly after, and this was in 1967. Loving versus Virginia was about the Loving family, a black woman and a white man who had children and who had married, moved to Virginia, were then arrested and brought to court. They made several appeals to the state of Virginia. And at first, Judge Leon M. Bazile turned away their appeal. He wrote that the Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. Now, this is a complete lie. God definitely welcomes interracial relationships, and in Numbers 12, Moses marries an Ethiopian woman. Her name was also Zipporah. And his siblings, Aaron and Miriam, disapproved of their interracial relationship at first. God then calls them out from the tent, and he explicitly condemns them, and therefore explicitly condemns racism. Now, since the Loving versus Virginia case, the Pew Research Center found that in 1980, 3 million of all marriages were interracial, and that number has only increased. In 2015, the number was 11 million, and that was 6 years ago, so the rates have gone even higher since then. Now, despite those seemingly positive statistics, data from dating sites show that strict racial preferences are very present today. Christian Rudder, who is the co-founder of OkCupid, compiled data from the site into a book titled Dataclysm. In this, he found that Black women and Asian men were rated as least attractive and received the least amount of interactions from the opposite sex. Now, this find is surprisingly common on most dating apps and services. Are You Interested, also known as AYA, which is a Facebook dating app, analyzed 2.4 million heterosexual interactions. In this, they found that Black women and Black men were rated as least attractive and also received the least amount of interaction. All men except Asians preferred Asian women. All women except Black women preferred white men. And almost all racial groups preferred another race over their own, except for the fact that white women preferred white men. And this is all data compiled from heterosexual interactions. But this find is even more common on LGBTQ+ apps, such as Grindr or Scruff, and sometimes even more intense because the dating pool is much more limited. Users will experience things such as no rice, no spice written in other people's bios, which alludes to the wanted exclusion of East and South Asian men. Or simply something as blunt as, if you're Black, don't interact, or if you're Asian, don't tap my profile. Yu Chen, who is a journalist at the Conversations US, interviewed several Asian men and found that this experience was almost universal. She's quoted saying, "Some people never make the cut just because they are already filtered out to gendered and racialized stereotypes. If racial discrimination that prevails in the intimate sphere is left unchallenged, many Asian men will repeatedly encounter sexual racism. As I stated before, this should be of concern to the public and to all of us. Sexual racism against Asian men is so normalized that it ends up on national television. Steve Harvey, a TV personality, recently read How to Date a White Woman, a practical guide for Asian men. Don't ask me why this exists, I have no idea. But regardless, Harvey then launched into a minute-long monologue about how no women, white or otherwise, want to date Asian men. He said, "You like Asian men? No. I don't even like Chinese food, boy. I don't eat what I can't pronounce." And the audience then laughed. If this is on national television and is something that we consume on a daily basis, and if this shapes popular culture, which therefore shapes popular opinion, what does it say when Asian men end up watching this themselves? When they're indoctrinated with these ideas, it could be very detrimental to their self-esteem and perception. And eventually they, along with us, will internalize the racist and misogynistic ideas perpetuated in these forms of media. Sometimes misogynistic, obviously this was against men, I do want to clarify that, but. Now you may be wondering, why do you find certain things more attractive than others, right? Why do we see some people as pretty and some people as not? Societal beauty standards certainly impact our preferences. With the rise of Christianity in Europe, light features such as blonde hair and blue eyes were attributed to godliness and holiness, and literally depicted as physical manifestations of God himself. Colonizers even traveled in the 15th century and spreaded the idea that whiteness equaled purity and darker skin equaled low economic status and educational attainment. Of course, this was in the 15th century, but the remnants of this idea are still ingrained in our very foundation today. Communities of color definitely suffer from these harmful standards. Black women are rendered vulnerable to the effects of white beauty standards because they emphasize certain skin colors and hair textures that exclude Black women. In specific, standards. In 1947, Clark and Clark experimented with 253 Black students between the ages of 3 and 7. Keep that in mind, that's how young these children were. And Clark were two psychologists, by the way. These students were given dolls that were identical in every single way. Same eyes, same nose, same lips, you name it. The only difference being that one doll was Black and one doll was white. Approximately 2/3 of the children stated that they liked the white doll better. And then when Curie Davis recreated the same experiment in 2005, she found that 16 out of the 21 participants that she had taken and interviewed still chose the white doll. When asked to pick the doll that looks bad, the majority of the subjects picked the black doll. And then one subject in particular, when asked to choose the doll that looked like her, reached for the white doll and then reluctantly touched the black doll, the same one that she said looked bad. So what does it say when even our children from ages 3 and 7 are internalizing these same ideas? Beauty standards shape racial preferences, but these beauty standards are rooted in racism, oppression, and colonization. The history of beauty standards are therefore racist. Sexual racism can have an opposite meaning when it evolves into a fetish. The Rocky College and Mountain, which is a student-led news group, defines a sexual fetish as a person's exclusive or almost exclusive preference for relationships, and in particular, sexual relationships with those belonging to specific racial groups. Racial fetishization is not merely liking someone's culture or appreciating it, but it's novelizing it, fixating on it, and making it the only part of their identity considered. A common example of a racial fetish in America is what is popularly known as yellow fever, which is a racial fetish but directed towards Asian women and sometimes men. There is a heavy psychological burden that is placed on Asian women who feel that they have to either resist or fulfill these stereotypes. And we all know that Hollywood has a long history of misrepresenting marginalized communities and creating harmful representation and reinforcing stereotypes. And they certainly do this with Asian women as well. Yellow fever is present in our media and film. A movie some of you guys may know is Austin Powers, which I'm going to be talking about the third installment, which was made in 2002. Austin, the protagonist, meets a set of Japanese twins, I suppose. And the movie alludes to him sleeping with them. He then crosses sleep with Japanese twins off of his bucket list. These women are depicted as submissive, stupid, hypersexualized, and existing solely for the pleasure of Austin. So when we see Asian women, when we internalize this idea, I'm sure many of you guys have even watched the movie yourself. Did you even stop to think how this is portraying Asian women? Similarly, the Black community is racially fetishized. Black female bodies continue to experience disproportionate rates of sexual exploitation and hypersexualization. Sardaki Bartman, who is a South African teenager, she was 19 years old, keep this in mind, was taken from her home in South Africa, was then brought to Europe, and became the main attraction at London's Piccadilly Circus in 1810. She even had a cage and her own personal handler. She was then noted as the greatest deformity in the world. You see, Sardaki had an abnormal amount of body fat in her body, and this was in different areas that European men and women weren't used to. And so therefore, she was both envied and desired by these European men and women, and also exploited. Sardaki then was conducted on by naturalist Georges Cuvier, who developed a deep obsession with her body and then experimented on her several times and concluded that Black women were the link between animals and were allegedly oversexed and alien beings. When Sardaki died at 25 years old, her body was then preserved, her genitalia and other parts, put in a museum, and then it was there for viewing. It wasn't until 2002 that she was brought back home by President Nelson Mandela of South Africa and laid to rest. Racial fetishes are damaging because they reduce a person to a singular trait and merely objectify them. Racial fetishization reinforces negative and dangerous stereotypes that portrays the person being fetishized as merely a commodity, a prize, or like Sardiki, an animal that should be conquered. Dismissing an entire racial group from your dating pool can lead to racist behavior. Microaggressions and casual racism should never be masked under the guise of a simple dating preference. So examine yourself. Take a hard and honest look at the preferences you hold and why. Practical approaches for those of you who are in the dating world and have dating apps. I hope it's not too many. We're all underage here. But for those of you who do have them, take a practical approach and intentionally delete ethnic-based filters. Diversify your friend groups and the media you consume. Focus on someone's individuality, interests, values, and personality over their racial or ethnic group. You may even find yourself open to other physical types. I know that when I examine my prejudices, I found that I was open to other physical types, like I mentioned, different heights, different eye colors, and it became more about who the person was and not about what they look like. I ended up appreciating more people and cultures, and it led to more open-mindedness in general. In conclusion, online dating platforms heighten the chances of encountering racist behavior, such as sexual racism and fetishization. And the goal is not to novelize or fixate on race, which can lead to fetishization, but to quash and reject stigmas that you may have about people from those groups. Especially because of the biblical condemnation of prejudices, it is up to us as Christians to embrace those differences, and to evaluate our own preferences. Race should never be an inhibitor or a reason to date someone. And eliminating an entire group of people truly limits one's potential to date and even the opportunity to find a soulmate. And it limits the meaningful connections we can have as people. Thank you.
Thank you, Zipporah. So does shifting one's focus, so let's say, well, we could go back in time to where I'm not married with 1,000 kids. And I've heard your thesis and have been moved by it. Could the argument be made that if I'm shifting my focus and saying, okay, well, I've heard this, so now I need to intentionally seek out other races, isn't that also then race-based dating?
I definitely would caution people to not date someone just to solely not look racist. You know, there are a lot of people who will be like, well, I'm going to date a Black woman now because I don't want to look racist. So I would caution people to, again, look at someone's interests and values. I would never judge a relationship on the basis of if I saw two white people together and I was like, that man or that woman obviously did not try and see if he could date someone else. But I would say, though, that if you are noticing a pattern or if you're generalizing a group of people, if you're saying, well, I don't usually date Black women, but I'm going to try it out, then you need to first step back and be like, why don't you date Black women in the first place? Am I answering your question? Thank you.
Great. I love the subject matter. Great subject. I have a million questions, but I only get to ask a couple. A lot of your research focused on the standards of beauty and why we specifically may choose one race over another, or our beauty standards, we gravitate towards that. What about the opposite side of that is that we choose or select based on our familiarity and our comfort level with that familiarity and what we deem as being more culturally relevant and we can identify. Like for a Black woman, it might be the swagger in a Black man. So, did you do any research on that, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's an excellent point to make. Thank you for your question, Ms. Joanne. A lot of material I came across was especially from people of homogeneous countries. So let's say you live in Japan, you're Japanese, you of course would gravitate towards someone who is Japanese because culturally you align. And that's an important point to make. There is definitely similarities that you will have with other people and that you will appreciate in other people who most likely will share a racial identity, the same one that you have. Again, I would still caution that laying generalizations over other people. If you end up saying, well, I want to date this person because we share a similar background, is to make sure that you're not choosing to do that because you see other people as inferior or because you see them as lacking, because that idea of lacking can very easily perpetuate itself into other forms outside of dating, in the workplace, etc. So I think culture is an important aspect to highlight, and it's definitely understandable, but I would just be careful with how you see other people who may not belong to that. But I understand it. As long as you're not fetishizing that same person, as long as you're not being prejudiced towards other groups, it makes sense, and I understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zipporah. You did a wonderful job. In many ways, your speech highlights the shallowness of dating apps and the rise of social media and its extreme emphasis on looks. And I will admit my list of who I wanted to marry one day had a lot of looks-based things on there. But now that I've been married for 14 years, I ask a different set of questions like, will the other person lay down their rights and be the one to get up with our crying baby, right? Or do they love Jesus? Or are they a hard worker? So a whole different set of questions. And so my question for you is, did the emphasis on looks seem shallow to you? And is there a different way to date that isn't so focused on the external?
Just to clarify, are you asking if the questions such as are they Christian, etc., are those superficial? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm more asking like, did some of the things in your research seem shallow to you, the things people were asking about physical attributes? And do you feel like there's a different way to date and that isn't so focused on physical, not making judgments about people's physicality, but a way to get to know somebody on the inside?
Generally, I would say that most people's preferences are sometimes shallow. I would say that a lot of people, when they look for a partner, most people want someone who's attractive. So I don't think that we should completely be like, it's all about personality, because for the most part, that just isn't true for a lot of people. But I do think that, as you mentioned, if you talk about your values and your interests, if those align and you're ignoring the fact that you're not choosing them because they are such and such race, or you're not ignoring them because they are such and such race, I think that makes sense for sure. I definitely noticed, though, that a lot of people have extremely superficial preferences and wanted to date someone merely because of what they look like. And that definitely can come back to haunt you, because then you end up meeting the person, you're like, I do not like this person at all, but they're so attractive. And so I would caution that in general, is that the physical exterior, it does not matter if you are looking for a lifelong partner at the end of the day, or if you're looking for someone who you want to actually get to know and date, because that physical exterior will crumble eventually. But that's what I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you, Zipporah. I think a lot of what drives our culture in general is kind of top down, right? For example, you mentioned dating apps kind of driving certain preferences, beauty standards. media in all its forms. Of those three, or there may be others, like who might be most responsible for changing the way we view race as it relates to our preferences?
That's an excellent question. I'm sure a lot of people were wondering. Are you specifically asking what people group, essentially?
If dating apps, beauty standards, media, if that shapes how we view other people and our preferences, who of those groups, or maybe there's a different group that would be most responsible for helping us change, if they're so influential in how we view other people and what we might prefer in a partner, of those groups, who might be most responsible for, is it the dating app that needs to change? Like, we're not even going to have,
Right.
is it the way beauty standards are thought of and depicted? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. I would say that dating apps, there are already a few dating apps that are slowly getting rid of their identity-based filters, and I think that needs to happen across the board. Because a lot of people don't even clarify why. Like if you say, I only date Black women, or I only date Asian men, like why? Like what is the reasoning behind that? So I think dating apps have to take that responsibility. But ultimately, I would say it's social media. I'm sure, especially if there's a lot of young people here, we use social media a lot. There are certain algorithms that make, like pretty privilege is a thing that make other people show up, people who are deemed pretty by our beauty standards. And then I would also say it's entertainment and Hollywood, because like I mentioned in the Austin Powers movie, if any of you have watched it, I'm sure a lot of people didn't pause to think, how is this portraying Asian women? And I would definitely caution people and request even that when you do watch movies, you wonder how people are being portrayed and how you're internalizing those ideas and those people groups. So I would say entertainment first, then social media, then dating apps.
I'm trying to think about how to make this question a general question, and I've given up. So I'm white. I have a white wife. I have 4 white children and 2 biracial children. How do I, as a parent, encourage my children to see beauty across races?
Well, thank you for your question. I would discuss it with them. When children get to the age where you notice that they're having, they're wanting or desiring romantic interactions, etc., I would get a feel for why they're choosing like celebrity crushes are a thing we all have or had as children, why they're choosing those people. And then if you notice that they're having certain ideas, they're like, a very honest conversation, even if all of their crushes are, for example, white men, then ask like, what about these men do you find attractive? And then if there was a man you put on the same pedestal, let's say you put like Chris Evans and Idris Elba on the same pedestal, you're like, why would Idris Elba not be considered? Idris Elba is a Black actor, by the way, Chris Evans is a white actor. Why would you not consider him? So having honest conversations, and I would give that to every parent of any racial backup, and so that's how I would approach it. Thank you.
Zipporah, America is steeped in a history of sexual exploitation of Black people. In any of your research, did you find any kind of how that translates or correlates into the interracial dating scene and the increase in interracial dating between Black and white people when you talk about fetishism and that kind of thing?
I have personally met Black women who have been fetishized in interracial relationships, and that seems to be a pretty, I don't know if I'd say universal, but if you were to say half of the Black women in interracial relationships, I'd say have probably experienced that. I also have noticed, though, that interracial relationships are fetishized. The idea of being in an interracial relationship, having mixed children, that has been something that a lot of people desire because you want to be with someone, you hold hands, and one of you has a darker complexion, the other one has a lighter one. So I definitely came across that. A lot of the experiences, the accounts, the personal experiences I read specifically from Black women when I was researching that aspect of my thesis was that they have more than once experienced that, especially on dating apps. If you're on a dating app, the chances, especially if you're an Asian woman or a Black woman, you will get suggestive comments regarding your race. And that's something that very specifically people of color experience. Not many white people would experience, oh, I can't wait to date a white man. But a lot of people of color, and especially Black women and Asian women, experience that. Thank you.
Zipporah, the Loving case in 1967, that wasn't that long ago, and it's hard to believe that that was illegal and really terrible. My question for you is, in your research, did you see any hope as you're going forward to where like things have progressed somewhat, or does it still feel like a field that is very moving in a wrong direction?
I would say that it's progressed. I have noticed it more with younger people, specifically on TikTok. When I had it a few months ago, a lot of people were being more honest about their preferences, which sparked more conversation. There's certain trends of like, this is my type, etc. And I would say that there's progress because people want to talk about it finally. Specifically, like Asian women, after the whole Stop Asian Hate movement became more popularized, they were saying, stop fetishizing us, stop making us your punchlines or your jokes and making assumptions about us. So I would say it's progressing. I just think we have a lot of work to do, and it takes more people will have to take accountability and be honest about these preferences, but it's moving somewhere. It'll just take a while for now.
Thanks.
Though I have more questions, we'll let you off the hot seat, Zipporah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Zipporah, thank you. While I haven't dated in a while, I do remember the emotional highs and lows of dating, and I'm glad to hear someone challenging us to include thought into our dating as well. So thank you for that. And let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Great job, man. Great job.
Your question section was really, really well done. Now it's done.
This is all the emotional release that happened.
Yeah. I know, I'm finally done. Finally done.
Oh, don't say that just yet because I have a couple of words.
Come on. How you doing?
No offense, Jeremy, I love you. It's my job to, help you get better. No offense.
I don't need this extra. My legs. Oh, Jesus.
It's going to be the same thing.
Thank you.
You didn't pass out. You didn't pass out. You don't have to drive you off my
Thank you.
He told me that he asked his friend to drive him off without being knocked out.
Oh, yeah, I asked her to. Because they wasn't here at the time.
Yeah.
I was saying I can't get up. My knees are like too shaky.
Yeah. He told me not even if he passed out, but to make him pass out. Just make him pass out. Don't stick. Literally. All my feet are really great job.
My legs so like.
I just did that. I just got finished doing that. Oh, at least you got to stand for a while.
Yeah, no. My knee is like, ooh. Wow.